Hey guys, I hope you're all doing really well. Welcome to me on my own in the studio. It feels very strange talking to the computer and talking to myself, but whatever, it's fun. So this is the first installment of my little studio recordings. I've got a lovely camera set up here on a tripod, which will help you see the patch bay, see some outboard gear, and see exactly how we're going to use these as hardware inserts, which is what we're doing today. So if we jump straight in, whoosh, there we go. Here's our track for today. It's just a simple indie pop rock track, nothing too fancy going on. Here you go. There we go. You guys get the picture. Yeah, it's very simple. I've done some EQing and some compression because all of the stems were just super dry. It was overdubs. The vocals got a little bit of limiting on it, a little bit of EQ. Use the standard Pro Tools EQ. I'm sure you'll notice I use a lot of the Universal Audio stuff. We've got some of them enabled on here, but that isn't today. So today we're just going to use a hardware insert. So the first thing I noticed was the drums, incredibly dry. Really not much going on at all. Same goes for the bass. It's not sounding very plucky. For a DI bass, that sounds great. It's okay, it's nice and consistent. However, it's not sounding fat enough or deep enough. So let's set up for the reverb, let's set up a stereo auxiliary return. So Shift Command N for a new track. Let's go with a stereo aux input. This is going to be our reverb return, our room return. So let's rename that room. Let's change the input to, let's pick a bus 9 and 10, that's available. Right click, rename it. Let's rename it room send. Let's change the output to, for you guys it would be control room stereo. For me, because I'm recording this, I'm just going to send it to the software. There we go. Mute it just to be safe, and then let's solo safe it. So Command S. Command S just solo safes anything. Let's insert a plugin insert just to show you the theory behind it. Let's use a nice plate reverb. There we go. Let's start by sending. So on the overhead channel, I'll send that to the door bus room send, which I just created here. And it brings up a neat little fader when you click on the send, or you can hold Command and click this little arrow to the left, and that creates a little drop down fader here, which isn't working for some reason. So I'll use this one. Okay, see what happens. Very good. It's a bit long, so I'm going to take the length down a touch. There we go, and just change the high shelf a little bit so it cuts anything below 125 Hertz. And also just be conscious of the wet-dry mix. When you're using a plugin as an insert on an auxiliary return, you need it to be 100% wet, because if you don't have that set and you've got a little bit of dry signal in there, you're going to be getting some of that dry signal sent to the aux, so you're effectively doubling up that dry signal, so it'll mess up whatever mix you've had in place. So always make sure the wet-dry switch is engaged, or if you don't have one, then switch it all the way to wet. There you have it. So to copy that over, I want to hold Alt and drag it over. Alt click, drag it over. So I've got it on both the toms now. I'm going to Alt click and drag it over to the snare. I'm going to drop these down, and I'm just going to give it a bit of a balance. That sounds pretty good. There you have it. There's a plugin insert. Another way of using this, if I just disengage that and disengage these. By the way, you hold Command and click to turn a plugin or an insert on or off, but that only works for VST plugins. It doesn't work for hardware inserts, which I'll show you in a minute. So another thing I noticed is this guitar over here. Sometimes you won't want to have dedicated reverbs on aux returns for each of your reverbs. So I might do another one of these stereo room reverbs for the guitars, and I might call that guitar room, so that it's nice and separate to the drum room. Or I might send a little bit of everything to this room. I could just copy it over to the rhythm guitar, for example, and I could send a little bit of that to this one room, so it sounds like everything is being played in one room. But sometimes, just sometimes, like for example on this pre-chorus guitar, it's nice because it's a mono channel. When I then insert, the final thing in the chain is you want your modulation or reverbs always to be last on your inserts, after EQ, after compression. Let's go for the plate again. And because it's mono, it's going to put it over wherever I pan it. So sometimes for ear candy or little bits here and there, sometimes for percussion maybe, you want to put an insert on the channel itself. But remember, we don't want it to be 100% wet. We want to have a little blend knob here. So let's pick a preset for guitar. let's call this, let's go with blue plate. That's nice and short here. Turn it off wet. There we go. Sounds like it's in a room. And now when I put that back in the mix with the drum room, there it is. So it's sounding a little better. And that's how we use a couple of ways to use plugins as inserts. So let's crack on with some hardware inserts. I'm just going to take these away. And I'm going to leave this. I'm going to use this auxiliary return for the Bricasti, the hardware insert. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, because this is now, we're coming physically out of Pro Tools into the matrix and then back out of the matrix back into Pro Tools, we need to set up our inserts in our IOs. Now the way that you do this is you go to setup, you click IOs, we've got our inputs, which are all the matrix inputs from the desk and from the patch bay, our outputs, 24 outputs, our busing, which is right here. Whenever you rename something, your buses, it'll rename it in the IOs, which is really handy because that means you don't have to faff about in here all the time. So here's our inserts. Now when using inserts, you need to make sure that it is a channel, or sorry, a signal path that isn't already in use. So for example, if we were recording somebody in here and we were using channels 1 to 16 on the desk, or 13 to 20, we would need to use anything after that that isn't in use. So personally, I like to go as far away from anything as possible. So I'm going to go to 23 and 24. So that's what I'm going to use for the Bricasti. Instead of renaming it here, which you can do by double clicking, I'm going to go into the buses. And so that I can enable this and see it in Pro Tools, first I have to go to the bus and uncheck the mapping to output on 23 and 24, because you can only use outputs and inputs once on the patch bay, and in Pro Tools you can't double up on it. So I'll go back to the inserts, check off this box, so now it should be available as a hardware insert. And to get there, I'll go back up to my inserts, and down the bottom here is IO, and there's 23 and 24. See where it says path inactive? That's why I had to go and uncheck the mapping to output in the buses. So here's 23 and 24, there it is. Now these, unlike plugins, if I hold Command click, it disables the plugin. That doesn't happen on this because it doesn't support the bypass feature. So if you're going to bypass it, you've got to mute the aux itself or just take it off. So I'll leave it on and I'm going to rename that. Right click, rename, I'm going to call it Bricasti. So now I know that this hardware insert in the IOs, that's Bricasti. And then the same thing applies. I'm going to send a little bit of the overheads to the bus, which I'd already set up, to the room send, which is set up here as the input on the aux. And now let's go and make the physical connections on the patch bay. Over here. Brilliant. Sorry, excuse me. So let's go Pro Tools Matrix Outputs 23, 24, which is what I chose it as. That didn't make any sense. And I'm going to go from 23 and 24 to the Bricasti input on the bottom. And then I'm going to go from the Bricasti output to Pro Tools Matrix input 23 and 24. Right there. So I'm coming out of 23 and 24 into the Bricasti and going back out of the Bricasti into 23 and 24. With hardware inserts, because you're physically putting something in the signal chain, it has to go out and come back in on the same channels. So I'll take you back to Pro Tools and turn on the Bricasti. This is now engaged. Let's send it. That sounds great. Let's put it over on the floor tom. You can really hear the difference between that and a plugin. This is just... There's something a bit more real about this because it's a dedicated piece of hardware. Let's take the snare down a bit. There we go. And that's that. That's how to set up a hardware insert. Let's crack on with the bass now and stick that through the LA2A compressor. So with things like compressors and EQ, you can insert that on the instrument itself. You don't have to set up an auxiliary return. So I'm going to go into the IOs again on inserts and select something. So at the moment 22 is inactive and it doesn't have a name. So let's go into our IOs. Oh, there we go. There's our inserts. So I know that I'm going to use 22 out of this stereo pair for the LA2A. So let's go into our bus mapping to output, uncheck that box, go back into inserts and check that box off. So now 22 should be available. There it is. So I'm going to right click it, rename it and call it LA2A compressor. There we go. So now that that's set up, let's play back the bass. Oh no, first we need to hook it up on the patch bay. So we're coming out of 22, Pro Tools output 22, going in to the LA2A right here, and then we're going to come out of the LA2A. You can't quite see it, it's off screen, but it's up in the top right here. LA2A out, and we want to come back into Pro Tools 22 inputs. And then I'll go and turn on the LA2A quickly. And I don't know if you just saw, there was a little bit of signal. Oh no, you didn't. Here we go. There, it's registering a little bit. That's the LA2A warming up. Okay, so now we have the LA2A hooked up. I can take you over and we can start dialing it in. So I'll just play the bass back. Right now, the peak reduction is set to 0, and I've just matched the input gain with a dry signal with the LA2A turned off. There you go, there's our bass. So I'm going to switch it to output so I can see the output. So now the needle is telling me how hard I'm hitting the compressor. And if I hit it up, it'll peak. Likewise, if I bring it back down, there we go. So let's switch this to gain reduction so that the needle now shows how much gain reduction we're getting. There we go. And obviously it's pushing it back, so it's getting quieter in Pro Tools. Let's compensate by bringing the gain up. And and you can see in Pro Tools where it's at. There we go. You can maybe, we'll just tickle it a bit. Or we can hit it really hard. Bear in mind, if you hit it really hard, if I was to stop playback and the dial goes back to 0, and then I all of a sudden hit play again. Oh no, it's okay. It hasn't peaked. Sometimes that happens if you've got the gain, the compensation set too high, and you're compressing quite a lot, but apparently I did it right. Let me just bring it up a little bit. There we go. And there you have it, the LA2A. So the last thing I want to show you guys is if you're ever in here and you, oh, sorry, I lost my recording there. If you're ever in here and obviously you don't have reverb units, hardware units in your halls or back at home. So if you ever have a project and you want to take away the reverberated signal or the affected signal, I'm just going to show you how to print that. It just takes a little bit of time and you just got to set up one more track. And it's just handy if you ever find a really nice room sound on the Bricasti or a lovely reverb or a really nice compressor setting, and you don't want to risk losing that setting or not being able to remember it, you can just print it. So I'm going to create a new track, new stereo track, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the reverb from this aux into this new track. So I'm going to call this room print, or you can call it Bricasti print. I'm going to mute it very quickly. I'm going to set my output to whatever our output is, and I'm going to pick a new bus for the input, just 2 random buses. So I'm going to pick bus 19 and 20, and then I'm going to send the room aux to 19 and 20, and I'm going to solo save this as well. So let's just try and do this with the drums. So now I won't hear the reverb until I pull this fader up. There will be a bit of latency because I'm sending it in the door, out through the patch bay, back from the patch bay, from the Bricasti, back into this aux, and now I'm busing it once more. So the problem with that is you need to go into your IOs, and for certain buses and channels I select delay compensation, but I can show you how to do that another time, mainly because it's long and I can't be bothered right now. So there will be a bit of latency when we're monitoring it, but it won't be recorded like that. There it is. It sounds like a little bit of slapback as well. And it's not quite how it sounded when it was just the aux, because that was a very clean send. So I'm just going to put this into record. I'm going to go here, find the channel, and then I can just select anywhere and we can start recording it. I'm going to save it so my settings are all saved, and Command Spacebar. There we go. So now I have a print of the reverb, and if I just mute the aux for a second so that we don't hear the reverb anymore, and I'll take this out of solo safe, the room print. I'll just play back the drums. there's our reverb, and it hasn't got that nasty delay because something called delay compensation is turned on down the bottom here. So when we're monitoring, we'll hear it, but when you listen back to the recorded signal, you get the reverb, which is really, really great. And that's it, guys. That's how to set up a hardware insert and how to burn it onto a track. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, please let me know if there's anything I can improve on. I know I was umming and ahhing, and there might have been some long gaps, but hopefully you understand it. Yeah, and just let me know if you didn't.